All right. So here's my question for each of you today. So I want you to stop what you're doing. So whether you're driving down the road, listening to this right now, and you're about to call on a prospect, you've got an appointment, you're trying to finish a sale, or whether you're about to pick up the phone to dial today to find new prospects to headhunt, or let's say if you're at the gym right now, wondering what your day is going to look like, or let's say that you're about to go into a board meeting to finalize a deal. Heck, even right now, maybe a Zoom meeting to finalize a deal with the board. I want you to stop and think about, what does it actually take? What does it really take? Not just talk about, but take to be a top 1% salesperson in your industry, the one you're in right now. The salesperson who makes all the money, they get any promotion they want, they have all the respect from management and the ownership, they have all the respect. Well, my next guest is going to answer that question for you. And let me give you a small taste of his background. So my guest today is the head of sales and marketing for a company called OpenSense, the software that turns everyday email into your most powerful channel for growth. He's a sales tech junkie. We're going to get into that. A reformed door-to-door sales professionals. I had to find out what that means. I started door-to-door. And former co-founder of 2 outsourced sales agencies. He's also co-authored the best-selling book, Outbound Sales, No Fluff, and has a new book coming out soon titled The B2B Sales Survival Guide. Let me welcome to the show, Mr. Rex Biberston. Rex, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Excited to chat with you.
All right, man. We're going to jump right into this. I know you've got a hard stop here in a little bit. So I'm excited to have you out here. And I love talking to sales professionals and trainers that actually understand the ball game, okay? That are not just talkers that sold 30 or 40 years ago and haven't sold anything since, but are in the trenches right now. And I love talking about human behavior and how that works, how to use principles and techniques when you're selling that work with human behavior so you can actually become a big-time salesperson. So I'm pumped to have you on here today. So I want to do this. I want to dive right into your story and maybe give our listeners, let's say, a feel for your background and how you've got to this point in your life where you're an authority on sales. Like, how did you learn all these skills? You're not just born out of your mother's womb knowing how to do this. How did you learn these? What happened?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I studied English in college, which of course leads you to basically a career path in teaching or nothing at all. So you have to figure out pretty quickly what you're great at. And when I was studying, I also worked at our test preparation department at our university and found out that, hey, if I just make a few tweaks here, I can increase our sales. I was in charge of sales and marketing. And I started playing with things and getting out on the street more and talking to users of people who were ended up, listening to our courses or being a part of it. And I just kept making little tweaks. I got to play with it and I realized, holy crap, oh my gosh, I love this stuff. I love getting people to buy things that are going to be beneficial for them. Yeah. So I ended up in a career in sales, went into door-to-door sales, then went into B2B sales, starting InsideSales.com.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that background. English is a great background, actually, I think, as a sales professional. My background in college was behavioral science and human psychology. So kind of like you, I found that when the company was giving me all these books from what I call the old sales gurus, that a lot of their techniques and stuff really didn't work at all. And in fact, when I used them, it would actually trigger sales resistance where people would run the other way. Sure. And so I found through hard knocks, probably like you, that really how to use human behavior to our advantage to get your prospect to want to engage with you and to want to actually look at what you're offering rather than viewing you as just another salesperson who's trying to sell them something. It's a massive difference. Now, I was searching around on you a little bit yesterday. I come in here usually the day before when I do these interviews, and I was online, and I know you have a new book coming out, okay, the B2B Survival Guide. Can you tell us a little bit more about the book and who you're writing this for? Like, what did you write this for to help like certain people? Like, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, to set the context, the first book that I co-authored was with a friend, Ryan Reiser, and he and I wrote a guide that we wished we had when we were starting our career in sales.
Yeah.
This is the next thing for me. If I were in sales just starting out again and I were getting frustrated with my boss or felt like I didn't have enough leads or felt like everything was against me, but my back was up against the wall, this would be the guide that gives me the answers of what to do. How do I take control? Because there's a couple of key principles that I believe in, that no one cares about your career as much as you should, right? Nobody. So you got to take ownership, right? And that you can't let others determine your success. So those two principles laid out in a book for, hey, when you're feeling this way, what do you do? When the reality is that you don't have enough leads, how do you create more opportunity for yourself? How do you face the hard facts of being an everyday salesperson and become a top performer? It's a very, very mental game, as I'm sure you understand in behavioral science. Like there's a lot of human psychology that goes into being a salesperson, not just into buying.
Well, I think you hit it right on the head. I mean, as a salesperson, if we're letting our company determine our results and our success, we're going to be maybe at best average. I mean, let's just be real,
Exactly.
right? Like top performers, the one thing that a lot of companies, so we have a big certification program in our sales training company, and a lot of companies will ask them, the first question they ask is, how much sales training did you purchase this last year to improve your selling ability? Not your company purchased, but how much did you purchase? And there's a lot of companies out there that if they say, well, I didn't purchase anything, or I read this blog, or I'm on this Facebook post and I follow this guy with that person's thing, a lot of times they won't even hire them because they know they're not really dedicated to their craft, right? And in our company, there's a saying that is training something you did or is training something that you do, right? If you want to be the best, you have to perform the best. You have to learn the best, right? So this leads me to the next question I really wanted to get into you from. What are some of the odds that are stacked up against a typical sales rep that prevents a lot of them from being really a top performer?
There's so many odds that we can count on to make life difficult for sales professionals, right? Yeah. The classic, the leads are weak. That's probably the most common one, right? You're expecting to be fed from marketing and the leads are weak. Yeah. And the response to that isn't that you're weak. It's that, hey, sometimes the leads are weak. And that's true. Occasionally that's the answer. Sometimes it's that, a global pandemic comes along and crushes some of your opportunity because the budget goes away.
Sure.
It could be you had some personal challenges that are making you feel weighed down. And personal challenges come up a lot during a global pandemic. So I think this is a time where a lot of us are realizing there is this personal side to sales that affects our ability to go to market and be confident and make closes happen.
Sure.
And there's all kinds of those external and internal factors that I think let's say the average sales professional is going to say, well, this is why I can't succeed. And an excellent or top 1% sales professional is going to say, this is why they can't succeed and why I'm going to succeed, right? This is what lowers the bar for me to be able to do just a little bit more, think a little bit smarter, work a little bit harder, be a little more intelligent, and rise above the rest.
So why do you believe that salespeople can become top performers despite those odds you just listed?
Because there's so much that we can control in sales. Yeah. You can show up earlier. You can work a little harder. You can work a little smarter. You can do a little more research. The bar is set very low. So to become a top performer, you just have to do that extra little bit. You don't have to do 200% of an average sales rep to perform at 200% of quota. You can get there by doing 10% extra, right? Just thinking about your process, getting a little bit smarter, working a little harder.
100%. And I think it's really your skill sets, because you hear it all the time, like salespeople say, oh, the leads are bad or buyers are liars. Most of the time, that's not the case, because if the lead responded to some type of ad, that means they have problems, right? I mean, they wouldn't be out looking if they didn't have problems. And if I ever hear, like, well, they don't have the budget, all that tells me is a salesperson didn't know what questions to ask in that conversation that caused that person to want to go out and find the budget to actually solve that problem, right? Because anybody can find the budget if they really feel like it's a massive problem. But the problem is that most salespeople don't understand is that most of your prospects you talk to don't even realize they have a problem. Absolutely. Or maybe they realize that there's a problem there. Maybe it's a small problem, but maybe they don't realize how bad the problem is or really how bad it could be down the road if they don't solve it, right? And when you're able to ask the right questions in that conversation, that gets that person to find problems they didn't even think they had, or maybe find out that those problems, that there's some major consequences if they don't solve anything, the hell with the budget. They'll go out and find the budget to solve that, because they realize if they don't, then they could lose tons of money, tons of revenue, tons of whatever they're selling if they don't go out and find the budget. So that's a major difference. Now, I know you were very successful in sales. When you were the most successful as an individual sales contributor, when were you? Like, when were you the most successful as a sales contributor? And what kind of made you stand out from the pack?
Yeah, and this was true of, let's say, nearly every sales role I had. I could identify one of those little 10% extra areas that I could get ahead of the rest.
Yeah.
started when I was selling door to door, right? So I sold alarms, and you can imagine pretty competitive industry. You're a 1099 contractor, you eat what you kill kind of thing. And the fun part about being that rep who everybody counted on to make the first sale was all I had to do was, as soon as we had our stand-up meeting at like 11 a.m., right? And everybody else got in their car and drove to McDonald's or drove to Burger King and got lunch and sat down and hung out and chatted and shot the breeze. And I got on the doors.
Yeah.
Right. That's all I had to do. All I had to do is pack my lunch ahead of time, eat in the car, and get on the doors. I would say my pitch out loud during my drive, that 10% little extra, and I would outperform everyone. I would always have the first sale or second sale of the day, and I would get a second sale.
You were starting an hour earlier while they were in Burger King, hung over by the fries, making them feel bad.
And I knew I could close more sales earlier. And I was one of the rare guys who had a family. I had a young daughter and a wife. So I liked being done at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. I didn't have to work longer hours. I worked earlier hours. I was a little bit smarter. So those guys were still straggling, trying to get that one in the, super dark outside, trying to get that person to open their door. They're a total stranger, uncomfortable situation. And I had already made my 2 sales and I was solid for the day. Maybe I'd go get a third, right? So that was one example. Similarly, at InsideSales.com, I was an early cold caller BDR type there. And I learned that, hey, everybody's in at 8. What if I got in at 7? What if I called my East Coast leads first? What if I did things just a little bit smarter, showed up a little bit early, and it's quieter? No one's distracting me. People aren't asking me questions. And boy, I'd outperform them in the morning by the time they were ready in the afternoon.
So it's those little tweaks. And I love that door-to-door. I started door-to-door selling alarms too. So I've got a lot of stories I could tell.
Nice.
I love that. Now, who are some sales professionals, I wanted to ask you this, who you really admire, who have really beaten those odds to become the very best, like top performers?
Yeah, and I think there's an important component of this to acknowledge that most top performers have had to do those little extra things, right? They become top performers because they actually change their behavior to adapt to the needs of the scenario. But one that I want to call out in particular is Amy Volas. So she is a well-known sales startup recruiter. So if you're an early stage company who's trying to hire sales professionals, sales leadership, she's the best, right? But she started her career and was forced into the enterprise sales world, kind of diving into the deep end and creating a process from scratch. Well, you can imagine if you've got a lot of odds stacked up against you as maybe an experienced male in the sales industry with all these other advantages, she came in as a woman with less prepared for her, less handed to her, and she created this incredible process and closed millions and millions of dollars in sales, and is now one of the people who I look to the most for how do you get that edge on the competition.
I love that. And it's all about the dedication to the craft, right? Like top performers, if you're LeBron James, you are dedicated to the craft. That's why he's the best, right? If you're, same thing with Michael Jordan. If you're Tom Brady, you're dedicated to being the best. If you're Tiger Woods, you have a coach. You're continually learning from other people to be the very best. Because if you're not progressively learning new skills, well, what ends up happens? You regress, right? You go backwards, right? It's a major thing. Now, I wanted to throw this question out to you, and I usually ask salespeople and sales trainer this question. In your thoughts, how has the consumer changed in the last 20 years? Like, how have they changed, and how has selling really changed over that time frame?
Yeah, I think one thing that's most challenging and probably most commonly gets brought up by underperforming sales reps is that there are more options to the buyer. There's more information and there are more options. Let's say you sell a software product or a hardware product, a physical good. There are about 10 times the manufacturers, the creators out there who now have this much lower barrier to entry. So you've got more competition in the market. Right. And buyers have changed in that we expect all the information at our fingertips at a moment's notice, and we want to get it crowdsourced from our friends, neighbors, and family members, right? And so significant shift in how we think about buying.
Yeah, today's buyer's an information age buyer, right? They're not like you can't sell on an opportunity like you did back in the 80s or 90s. And it's very simple when you think about it, because 20 plus years ago, what was the bridge between the company and the consumer? It was, of course, the salesperson, right? So company would send out the salesperson to educate. Like, people expected to be educated about the products and services, because besides TV and maybe radio or newspaper, that's really how you learned about services or a company's products. But like you said, with the power of technology and the ease of the internet, especially social media, we live in a completely different day and age, right? Because like you mentioned, the consumer, they know all about your company. They know all about your products, your services, your price points, who your competitors are. They know everything about you by simply doing a Google search, even on their smartphone now, right? Not even their computer. And I think you said it, because of that newfound power, they'll no longer be manipulated or pressured by pushy salespeople because they know they have many choices to choose the exact product or service that you sell. So you have to learn new skills. I see that so many times. I see salespeople, maybe in their 50s or 60s or even their 40s, that come in and sold a certain way 10, 15 years ago, and it just doesn't work anymore. And they keep like beating their head against the wall, and I call them like product pushers, right? So we teach you how to become a problem finder and problem solver, not a product pusher. And so many salespeople have been taught this age-old adage that you need to like really talk about your features and benefits. Now you have the best this and the best that, and talk down your competition. And when you do that, according to behavioral science, it actually triggers more sales resistance. They actually trust you less when you put down your competition. I mean, it's crazy when you really think about these numbers. Now, one question I wanted to ask, how do you fine tune your craft? Like once you get good at selling, you're making a good income, how do you go to the next level? Like how do you improve to sell even more?
I think there's a couple of key ways. One is getting context outside of your own environment. A lot of the best sales professionals I've learned from have either had jobs in many different industries or outside of sales and came into sales later. And they now have a context that most sales professionals struggle with, right? They don't know how to think like a buyer, how to think like an engineer or their end consumer. They have no concept of what it's like to be on that receiving end. And so they struggle. Or maybe they've always sold software and software sales are done a certain way. And they have no concept of what it's like to sell hardware. So if they go and learn from somebody who sells hardware, it's going to shake some things loose in their brain, some new ideas, some ways to change up the old game and stop doing what everybody else is doing. Because that's really the trap you fall into is, well, everybody else at my company is doing X. Well, cool. You should try Y. You should at least test it out. You owe it to yourself to become a top performer. You got to do something slightly different and experiment on it. And the final thing I had to suggest here is constantly iterating. When I first learned how to sell and I was learning how to memorize a script, I would continue to adapt my script. I would notice, all right, I get stuck about midway through my introduction. Why do I get stuck there? Okay, well, let me try some different language. Okay, well, now I'm getting stuck on the turn here, right when I want to ask them for something, right? And you keep improving those little bits along the way, those incremental improvements, and you will see an outsized impact on your results.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's really the art and science. It's really being dedicated to your craft, because if you've got your sales structure written down and you notice, like you said in your introduction, that a lot of times they maybe start peppering you like, what's this all about? Or what's this? You're like, okay, what am I saying there? Instead of blaming the prospect, because most salespeople just blame, like, oh, buyers are liars, or they don't have the budget. They just blame. You have to look at ourselves and be like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what question am I not asking in the beginning, or what am I saying that's triggering them to resist so early on? Or when I ask what we call commitment questions at the end, not really closing, but let's say closing for everybody's sake. When I ask this closing question, I get this objection. So I need to change this around and to eliminate that objection from happening, objection prevention. How do you learn the right skills or the right questions to ask in that conversation that prevent objections from even happening? Right? That's when you hear people say, oh, the more objections they give you, the more interest they have. Really? Is that really true? Like, is there any data on that? Because if you ever have, as well, when you sold alarms or whatever you sold, B2B, that the easiest sales you had were people that didn't have any objections.
They were laydowns.
Right? They were just laydowns. So how can somebody be more interested that has more objections? No, the truth is the more objections you get, the less likely they are to buy. So you have to learn the right questions to ask in that conversation that prevents most of those objections from even happening. And if they do bring out an objection, how do you get them to overcome their own objection, right? You have to learn those skills. Now, I wanted to ask you this, and I do ask this question for everybody. What's one question that a salesperson should be asking their prospect to build urgency in the sale, to really get that prospect to think about their situation and want to change? What's one question on the tip of your tongue?
Yeah, if we had never had this conversation, what would you have done differently from today? If we hadn't gotten on this call, if you hadn't reached out or I hadn't reached out, if we hadn't gotten connected, what would you be doing to solve this issue today or to create this opportunity, right? Sometimes you don't solve a clear problem, but how would you be attacking this challenge today?
That's I love that question. Tell us the psychology behind that. Like, why do you ask that question, and what does it trigger in that prospect's mind? Like, what are you looking for? Because I love that question.
Sure. I think for most sales reps, it's an opportunity to be a little humble, to say like, hey, it's not necessary. I don't deserve this sale. You don't owe me something because we had this conversation. You're going to go with the status quo or whatever your idea was before I came along. It reminds me, and this is for the sales rep's benefit, that I have to do some selling here. I have to educate the prospect as to why what I'm proposing is better than the thing they just communicated. Yeah. And it also shows active listening. I want to know so that then I can couch my answer, my description, my explanation, my value proposition, and my proposal in a way that's going to make sense and be relevant to you, the buyer, which is a big challenge for most sales reps who just follow the process and do the work and say the things, and they don't listen. So I think it's a lot of opportunity for the seller.
I think active listening is probably the biggest weakness that most salespeople have, right?
Sure.
Because even if they get an objection, like you said, they don't really listen to what's behind the objection. Like, what does that objection actually mean? Not
Yep.
just what they said, right? Because they've heard it from other prospects before. So when they hear the same thing, they go into what? Objection handling mode. They throw out some type of what they call rebuttal. And then most
Yep.
of the time, the prospect throws out more objections and they end up chasing them. And then they become commoditized, where it's just competing on price. Like, it's a vicious, nasty cycle. So I
Yep.
think you brought it up. So true that you have to have active listening. So it's like you have to be present in that conversation. And when they say something, you have to learn to really clarify what they mean by, well, John, when you said that, tell me a little bit more about that. Or how did you mean by that? So I understand what's behind that concern, right?
Yep.
And so when you listen like that, not only do you find out the correct information to be able to feed back what they said they wanted when you're presenting them, how you can solve problems, but more importantly, what is that prospect feeling? They're like, wow, Rex really cares about me. Like, he's here, or he or she is here to really look at my situation to see if they can help. Whereas most prospects view salespeople as like, how do I get rid of this person who's trying to stuff their solution down my throat?
Yep.
And I love that. And I can't wait to tear into your book. Now, I wanted to ask you this as well. What are some top resources that sales professionals need to really develop or turn to support to really beat the odds? Like, what are some resources they really need to turn to and develop?
Yeah, I think one thing that we don't talk a lot about in sales, and there's folks out there like Richard Harris who are doing more about this, is the mental health side. We need a community. We need a group that we can turn to, ask questions of, learn from, benefit from, and complain to sometimes, right? Who's not our boss, who's not our coworker. We don't want to drag other people down, but we want to have that camaraderie of, man, I'm feeling rough today. Like, I just got off this tough call and I don't know how to pick things back up. So having a community, these are incredibly available to us now, thanks to the internet. We can go to LinkedIn, Reddit, Slack groups. There's all kinds of support out there for this, but reaching out and finding that one where you have some community, where you feel part of it and you can get that camaraderie. That's a really big one. Having a strong relationship with management, understanding and accepting that maybe they have slightly different motivations or goals than you do, but doing at least what they want and then more, what you want on top, right? Not trying to get around what they want, but having that great relationship. They can trust that they ask you to do something, you're going to do it. And you're probably going to do a little bit more. You're going to do a little bit nicer job than anybody else. So having that great relationship, because then this is the principle of extreme ownership, right? Which is, you can go to them and ask for something and they will trust that you actually need it. They will trust that time off is required. That is a good thing, that you're not just whining about something.
Yeah.
Or that if you suggest a new process or a new technique, that they know you've thought about it, you've been a little bit harder worker than the average bear. So I think that established relationship with management is actually a really big benefit that a lot of people try and avoid. They don't want to deal with their manager most often.
Yeah, and that's such a mistake, right? Because they're valuable tools there. Even if you might not agree with everything they're doing, there's definitely tools there and sway that they have, even with management above them, that's really going to help you learn. It's going to help you grow. It's going to put you in better position for different promotions if that's what you're looking for. You have to make that inroad for sure. And so many salespeople just get prideful, right? I always say that salespeople who make low six figures have such high egos, right? And they let their ego really hold them back from really doubling what they're making, tripling or more what they're making, when they really could if they just learn more and let more advanced skills, but they stay stuck because they have such a high ego.
Totally.
Right? Let go of that ego for sure. Hey, I can't thank you enough for being on here. This is a great interview. Do you have any final thoughts or advice for our listeners, Rex?
I think one thing is to reflect every week on what went well and what went poorly, and make one thing you're going to do differently next week, right? It's It's that 10% incremental improvement, that 1% a day even. But I like to look at it in weekly batches. Often we get overwhelmed and trying to put time on your calendar for every single day, reviewing what went well or poorly. But I fill out my calendar, I say what I actually did, and then I go look back at it and say, man, what went super well? What was ineffective? How do I make next week different than this week? And then you're not stuck in, it's too long. You're waiting until the end of the quarter to review what worked and what didn't, and you're not feeling overwhelmed daily.
Well, you're just prepared. You have to be prepared as a sales professional. If you want to make a lot of money in sales, you want to help a lot of people solve problems, you have to be prepared, right? To be a professional. Now, where can our listeners learn more about you and your training?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Rex Biberston. They can also I have a website called nofluffselling.com, and this is just where I occasionally share some thoughts and ideas there. I also do some consulting with companies early stage that are building out their processes. Sure. But I'm excited to share the new book. I mean, I have always loved working directly with individual sales contributors and just helping them wherever I can, throwing out a piece of advice, and then I hear, oh, hey, I was able to get that promotion, close that sale, whatever it is. I don't do official coaching in that way, which is actually the reason that I'm writing the book, is I want to share in a broader way, a little bit easier access, that people, if they were struggling with something, wanted to come directly to me, they could now get a copy of the book and get those answers that I would have shared with them personally.
Awesome. I love it. So send an email for the book. How do they get a book?
Yeah, just shoot an email over to book@nofluffselling.com. And I will hook you up with a pre-edition as soon as we get that first version ready.
I love that. Rex, pleasure having you on. I'm going to have you out here more. I know you've got a webinar to get on here in a minute. I'll talk to you soon.
Very good.
Now, if you're serious about joining the top 1%, I mean the top 1%, and you want to experience more training content just like this, click the links right over there. Right over there, they're exactly what you need to see next. You see, I release new episodes featuring top salespeople and sales authorities, multiple six-figure, high six-figure, even seven-figure earners. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and smash that subscribe button right below, and join our new Facebook group, Sales Revolution. You see, it's free, and there's a link in the description below just for you. We put it there for you. Finally, I make posts on Facebook and Instagram each and every day with more tips and training, so be sure and follow me and turn on your notifications. So make a comment in the first 7 minutes to any of my latest posts, share this episode, and there's a very real chance that you're going to win some killer prizes. And here's the thing, don't sit on the sidelines. Don't be like everyone else. Get into the game. Join the sales revolution. Stay active, get involved, learn the right skills, and we will show you how to take your life and income to a level that most only dream about.